that you actually mute yourself on your own phone because he's calling in as an attendee. Ryan, you're going to need to *6 yourself so that we can hear you. That way, we don't have to worry about the fact that there will be extraneous sounds because we cannot actually mute him the same way that, or mute everybody else rather, the same way. Otherwise, we run the risk of muting him. Ryan, are you there?
Hey,
No.
I am.
There
indeed.
you are. Perfect. So we've given you the ball, so you need to share your screen for us.
Okay.
And I'm just going to give everybody a few housekeeping notes here while you're getting set up. The recording will be posted as the other ones have been. Thank you all for joining us each week with our regular INKY Bites, research bites that have been in place of our annual conference. Because of course, with the COVID situation, we're not able to have an in-person meeting this year. But we've been really lucky so far with all of our presenters and have had a really great plethora of different topics and discussions. So it's been a really exciting time so far. Because we have so many people registered for the talk, there's more than 50. I'm not sure what our final number ended up being today. What we're going to end up doing is, if anybody has any questions, if you can send them through the chat. And after Ryan has finished his talk, then we'll moderate a bit of a Q&A period. And if it appears that there aren't too many questions, then potentially we can open it up and have a little bit more of a conversation with people off of mute. But otherwise, what we found is that it just gets to be a little bit too confusing. So Ryan looks like he's mostly ready, so I'll just do a bit of an intro here. So I'm really pleased to introduce my friend, Dr. Ryan Brook, who is an associate professor in the Department of Animal and Poultry Science in the College of Ag and Bioresources at the University of Saskatchewan. Ryan works with a wide variety of different wildlife, such as moose, caribou, elk, deer, and spends some considerable time up in the north, as well as having done his PhD on the elk around Riding Mountain Eradication Area in Manitoba. So today he's actually going to speak with us about the invasive wild pig issues and what some of the possible mitigation and preventative measures could be in going forward in Canada. Thanks for being here, Ryan.
Great. Thanks so much for the invite. Appreciate being part of this, and having opportunities to speak to other adults is great while we're still hunkered in the basement here. Can you hear me okay, Jasmine?
Yep, that's great. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. So I will jump right into this. And first of all, I want to start off by acknowledging my co-authors on all this work. Ruth Asham has been doing her PhD with me and is getting close to the final stages right now. And Corey Kramer is also to wrap up his MSc. So a lot of the work I'm going to talk about today is co-produced with the two of them, and certainly a whole bunch of other collaborators that have contributed a lot of information and support. This has been some big work that we've been doing. And this started 10 years ago when I first started at U of S. Was looking for some novel things to study now that I had my own research program, and pigs came on the radar as being fairly not a huge issue and not a lot of people particularly concerned about them, but something that looked like it could really turn into something over the course of my career and looked like it might be worth a career worth of research. So let's jump into looking at this whole wild pig issue. Of course, oops, there we go. And so this started much later. The U.S. has had a 500-plus year history of wild pigs. Our history is much shorter here in Canada, and really we know with very high certainty that the source is from these farmed animals. And so in the 1980s and into the 90s, there was a strong push to diversify agriculture and bring in different farming techniques, and one of those was wild boar that were brought over from Europe. A lot of people talk about Russian wild boar. The genetics are starting to suggest that isn't a thing, and so we think they're almost all European. And they were brought onto farm to raise for two reasons: for meat primarily, but also these high fence shoot operations have grown in popularity, and they're still in Alberta, Quebec, Saskatchewan has them as well. So shooting animals inside a fenced area was and is a popular sport because they are very hard to find in the wild for many people. So this worked out okay until they started escaping, and unfortunately a lot of people started cutting fences. And so we had 100, 200, 300 or more in one shot were released into the wild. And this is where they became established and started to really expand into the wild. And so we started to see more and more of this going on, people reporting sightings, people complaining about problems with pigs, especially harassing livestock, crop damage, these sorts of things, or just being kind of scary on the landscape when you come out of your front porch and see this on your lawn. This is quite unique, or at least it was. In the 1990s and into the 2000s, it was fairly rare, although it's increasing quite substantially in frequency in recent years. There's a classic, what we call a sounder group of pigs, where we have a mature female, obviously nursing. The large female there in the middle is clearly nursing some younger animals from multiple litters, and then relatively newborn piglets. And this is a fairly typical sounder, although I will say one thing we've observed in the last 10 years in Western Canada is a notable increase in the bigger sizes of sounders, where, you know, this was quite a good size sounder when we first started, and now we're seeing double or triple that and into the 3 dozen animals in a sounder, which is quite amazing. I won't go into the details too much of how we collected this, but I'll cite the paper in the next slide. You can check that on it if you want, but this is from primary focus of Ruth's PhD work has been tracking occurrences of animals. And we don't have good density data, and we don't have a population estimate. I know that's probably typically the most common questions we get: how many do we have and how dense are they? And that's something we're working on, but nobody has any good data, really compelling data on that. But suffices to say, using 8 different methods, they all show the same trend upward. And this is really consistent with what we know about wild pigs around the entire world. And so, Chris Rock has this great line where he says, the tiger attacked someone at Vegas, and they kept saying tiger attack. And he said, no, the tiger didn't go crazy. It went tiger, and it did exactly what tigers do, looking for meat. And that was his joke. Well, these wild pigs behave exactly like wild pigs do. There's no surprise or shock here for anybody in other countries around the world, whether Australia with many, many millions, the USA with, something on the order of 4 to 5 million wild pigs, and so many countries around the world, and even in their native range in Europe and Asia, they are spreading really, really rapidly and expanding. So this is consistent with what we should have expected all along, but they've done really well in the wilds of Canada, and the number of occurrences, especially in the last 5 years, has been really, really striking how they're on the increase. This is the most recent map that Ruth did, and this is the paper you can look up. It's a free download, open access article on Nature Scientific Reports that kind of summarizes the methods, but she maps a series of progressions showing that up until this is the 2017 map, showing these are watersheds. So each red blotch is a level 9 watershed, which has a presence of wild pigs. And this is the basis of the analysis we'll jump into today. I will say we're working on a 2020 update, and the story continues exactly as we've sort of tracked it so far, is that we just keep expanding and expanding. So in fact, unfortunately, the 2020 map is even more grim than this in terms of distribution. And again, this isn't reflective of density. This is presence only. But we're working towards building on that and expanding to have it more refined. But obviously, when we're talking about the livestock interface, even one animal coming into action can be cause for some concern. This slide was actually taken from a video that a bus driver took from he had a school bus full of kids up near Prince Albert, and stopped on the side of the road and videotaped. We'll show you the whole video, but this quite large wild pig here put a bit of a chase on these cattle and caused quite a level of interest. Now, we don't think from everywhere else we've seen that they're going to be significant predators, but what they do have a long history of, even here in Saskatchewan and certainly in other countries, is harassing wildlife and causing stress. And of course, when we get into shared feeds and we see them commingling like this, raises the concern around disease. And certainly across Western Canada, we have huge areas of extensive livestock production like this, where we have cattle out over large areas, and so lots and lots of opportunity for interactions like this, and not great outcomes when they do. A particular interest in what I'll focus on today is really the domestic pig, wild pig interface, and this is a photo we took in about 5 years ago now in southeastern Saskatchewan. We stopped on the side of the road, and this animal had moved in permanently and taken up residence on this sort of mixed bag, I guess we'll call, open farm with domestic pigs. And that spring, all of the piglets that were born were very clearly sired by this male. They had the horizontal cream-colored stripes and were clearly had wild boar crossed into them. And so high level of interaction at this level. And we also have, on the flip side, we also have some free-ranging herds of domestic pigs. So we have some Yorkshire pigs on the landscape in Canada, free-ranging as we speak, and those animals are interacting and crossbreeding with wild pigs that are free as well. And so on the ground, we have a whole mixed bag. And so we see free-ranging wild pigs that are probably a few that are mostly pure wild boar. We see a large majority that are some kind of hybrid. We also have been seeing a number of, probably in the last 3 years, especially this year, potbelly pigs out on the landscape as well. And they've been interestingly aggressive. And we had one just outside of Saskatoon a few weeks ago that was very, very aggressive against horses and put the run on them and really scared them for several days and had to be put down. So lots of concern there. Certainly, again, on the disease side, this is a photo that, as someone who's spent a long time thinking about interactions between livestock and wildlife, this is the one that gets me probably more nervous than anything. And certainly in the context of disease, the most pressing one on certainly in my mind is African swine fever. And this has been a global issue for some time now, and it's really expanded in Asia and Europe, and has caused having to have millions of domestic pigs put down. It is only a disease of swine, but obviously has massive domestic pig implications, and certainly would be, I think the word catastrophic would be fair to say, if it ever entered into North America. And certainly you see the kinds of responses in Europe here, talking about fencing entire borders between countries, or partial fencing of key risk areas between borders, because it is well recognized that wild pigs, or what they refer to as native wild boar in Europe, can be a reservoir for the disease. And because they can move some significant distances, they could be potentially transferring it across, across international borders. So big concern there. Obviously, no African swine fever in North America, but given the role of domestic pigs in our economy and agriculture, and combine that with the known broad distribution over now what is 1 million square kilometers of Canada. That's a huge area. So lots of opportunity in Canada for overlap and interaction of a range of diseases, and certainly thinking, crossing our fingers and hoping against African swine fever, but also thinking that if that happened, what does that mean? And what, as we find with wildlife in general, of course, that on the livestock side, if there's disease, these animals are tracked and numbered, and everybody understands premises. And for the most part, we have very, very good disease on farms and can rapidly respond to that. But in the wild, everything is a big unknowns. We don't have lots of great data on really fine scale, and we know they move dramatically. 300-400 square kilometer home ranges are what we're talking about, which is 2 orders of magnitude bigger than what they see in studies in Europe. So these pigs in Canada, For reasons I say we probably don't fully understand, they move more than any other wild pig study on Earth. So they are highly mobile. This is some of Ruth's first cut at looking at some spatial overlap here, and the purple hatched is where we see overlap of wild pigs and some known disease areas. This is still a work in progress, but I want to show it just as kind of tracking where we're heading and the kinds of things that she's working on. But this is just a broad Canada-US overview of some of the areas. And so we have these, so Western Canada, we have this pocket, a quite significant pocket of wild pigs. And of course, the US has this massive issue. And California, Florida, Texas are completely 100% covered in wild pigs, essentially. And so they have big issues down there, certainly well over 1 million and 2+ million in Texas alone. And so where we see some of these diseases like TB, brucella in wild pigs, brucella in other wildlife, pseudo-rabies, we're seeing some areas that are coming right up, knocking on Canada's door. And so the potential role of pigs moving across the international border is certainly something that's another big focus that I won't speak to today, but that's what a big focus of Corey's master's research. Now let's get right into the data. These are data provided by the province, and with much thanks for a whole bunch of people that helped collect and then ultimately share, and Jasmine played a big role in helping us to get all of these data in hand. But these are the domestic pig data, so we can see density. And this is just overlapped over those watersheds where we know we have wild pigs. So we're seeing that overlap. And again, these watersheds are at the order of that match pretty conservatively with the home range of wild pigs. So each individual watershed is roughly comparable on the small side, in fact, but we're being conservative here. So level 9 watersheds make good sense. And so we can see the overlap. And what we do get from, thankfully, from the Pig Trace program is that we can also split that into the large-scale commercial farms and then the small scale. And some notable differences there between the two in terms of densities, and that'll come through. And we felt that it was important to model the two separately, but also combined. So we have a different look at the data sets in the same manner, but recognizing that there's a big difference between these big sow barns and some folks that have, dozens of animals in the back 40. So here's some of the predictor data sets that we use, and obviously crops are very, very important. Pigs are really, really rely, and we see this tremendously in our collar data. These animals are spending large amounts of time feeding on agricultural crops, and this is, we believe, one of the major reasons why they survive in a Saskatchewan a week of minus 50 wind chill. How do you survive that? Well, you do that by eating agricultural crops from the time they come out of the ground until the time that the last bit is accessible on the ground in the fall before the snow flies. And indeed, these indicate where sites of stored grain are as well, and grain bags and hay bales and these sorts of things. Forest cover is hiding cover. Water they use a lot. They're wallowers. They need to cool down in the summer. Farm type, we looked at small and large scale, as I mentioned, and then distances between domestic pig farms and wild pigs, and wild boar farms and domestic pig farms. So while we do have a lot of wild pigs running on the landscape free range, we also know that wild boar farms were and continue to be sources as well. And interestingly, in our original models, and what came out here, is that one of the best predictors of wild pigs on the landscape is where are the current and past wild boar farms. These were and are the sources, so this is no tremendous surprise, but definitely gives us some good data to start to build predictive models of where these interactions are most likely to occur. And so in our trail camera program, we have, I can't even think off the top of my head, something on the order of 21,000 images, and so we have lots and lots of photos from all of our cameras, and this is exactly what we'd expect, that corn is king, and pigs are highly attracted to egg crops, and right from the time they start to come up all the way through the growing season. And so egg is a big predictor of this for sure, both at large scales in terms of crops, but also at very fine scales in winter. If you know where a grain bag is, or or if there was, we had a very weird year last year where crop wasn't entirely harvested, and so swath grain left out on the ground was just a fantastic attractant for wild. If you have, entire huge areas, quarter sections, and large patches with no cover and just pure crops, that actually probably flips, and pigs are much less attracted to those sites because it is this combination of wetland forest and ag crops that really are the triple threat. And when those three come together, we start to see a lot of pigs. So here we are in terms of probabilities, and so these are all those watersheds, and now attached relative predictive from our what we call resource selection function models, which predict occurrence of wild pigs across these. And we can see that while there's a lot of similarity, there are some notable differences by individual watershed depending on the type of farm, whether it's large or small scale. In terms of the factors that predict that, certainly, as I mentioned, distance to wild boar farms is the single most important predictor variable, and they are choosing. So they're choosing to be close to wild boar farms, and that's where they came from. Annual crop, landscape heterogeneity. So they like that mix. They don't want just a big monoculture of wheat. They want some wheat and barley and some canola and other crops, especially corn, if they can, mixed with other landscape, lots of edges. We need forest cover, that sort of thing. Forest cover is always critical. They spend a ton of time in the forest because they are shot at. The provinces are open season, essentially, so they are being shot at a lot. They're avoiding roads, which is not surprising, related almost certainly directly to the idea of not getting shot. And, looking at avoiding developed areas where humans are, of course, and coniferous forests. They're not a fan of conifer. So that's our first slice, looking at how we predict some of this overlap at the watershed scale. Another time we can spend a whole session just talking about the GPS collar data, but I will pause here just to note that we have looked at that at multiple scales. And at the very fine scale, we do see individual farms being visited, in some cases hundreds of times by GPS-collared pigs. And so at the very fine scale, we're seeing pigs coming right on farm, moving through, visiting spilled grain sites, where that auger is hooked up to the feed bin. There's some spilled grain. They're coming in there. And indeed, in some cases, worst case, are actually hopping the fence, or in the poor operations, walking over the snow in the winter, not even having to jump and walk and drop straight into the area. So certainly considerable number of opportunities. And, when we think of this large scale and we talk about commingling and sharing a watershed, that is just sort of honing in on areas of potential concern. Those farms, and certainly, the really good commercial farms, we don't expect a lot of interaction. But at the same time, they're in the same watershed, and those pigs are moving over huge areas and using most of that watershed. So likelihoods of fairly high levels of commingling are there, but also direct visits by pigs to farms. And that's really come through in the collar data. And so the burning question, well, what do we do about this? A lot of people jump to this idea of hunting and that this is going to save the day. Unfortunately, the reality is that sport hunting is not part of a viable solution by itself. We see hunting as actually spreading animals around, and probably one of the reasons that pigs have reached 1 million square kilometers here in Canada is that because of sport harvest that has broken up groups and split them around and chased them over large areas. And and we see that success rates are quite low. From our collared animals, we had some that lived 2 years and were never harvested. And so one of my major concerns actually with collaring was that we were going to get into this and be just completely overwhelmed with people shooting them. In fact, that was the opposite. So hunting is not the obvious solution. We need management plans at multiple levels. Alberta has a plan, which is great. No other province has one that I'm aware of yet. There's lots of meetings going on now at national, provincial, and local levels. We're seeing things change considerably. So I hope to see that change soon, and I think the discussions are leading in that direction. We need some targeted control efforts, so focus on removing whole sounders, You have to choose: do you want sport hunting or do you want eradication? You can't have both. And the major provinces, all three of the prairie provinces right now, allow sport hunting. The successes in the U.S. come when they close down sport hunting and move to full, planned eradication efforts. We have a big toolbox we could use. Most of the focus right now has been on ground traps and a small number of ground teams going in and shooting in sounder groups. We've experimented with Judas pigs with GPS collars and had quite good success with that. That's really, really good way to find and remove pigs very rapidly. Wild boar farms, we don't know where they all are. We don't have a good handle on them. They are still very, very leaky. We're seeing lots of leakage, especially at the meat farms, but especially these high fence shoot farms that cover large areas. They're getting out. And a lot of people joke that, why pay the money to go inside to hunt when you can hunt around the outside for free? So that's a big one. We don't have wild boar part of pig trace formally in terms of we've never seen on the landscape, although we know they're escapees, we've never seen one with ear tags or tattoos and marks. And so we don't know where they come from. So getting that in place is, I think, critical for sure. This whole pot-bellied pig thing, I think, is going to go nowhere but up. It's becoming big in the pet trade, and people are just finding these large animals and growing up from the teacup pig into something big, and they just let them go. And then on-farm risk assessment and biosecurity, as we haven't seen major success in eradication, and indeed, I think that, in my view, we probably can't fully eradicate at this point. So the local farm scale stuff, I think, is where we're going to see a need for real effort. Whether that's the big, large scale farms or backyard farms, that'll require different approaches. But feed management, because we know that it's the feed that pigs are coming for, as well as the smell of females is attracting animals, of course, as well. And then, opportunities to consider perimeter fencing and even this notion of potentially double fencing comes up. I think lots of room for discussion to sort of look at all of these options. And I don't think any one of these is going to get us there anytime soon. I think it's really thinking of this as a big old toolbox full of options is our best bet. So with that, I will thank the funders and a whole bunch of supporters, including the Moose Mountain Eradication Team in Saskatchewan that really gave us the first start to get this all going. The USDA has funded the overwhelming majority of our research program, and none of this would have happened without the USDA, but Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation, certainly the startup grant from U of S and ongoing support. We've received some sporadic funding from Fish and Wildlife Development Fund in Saskport. So with that, I will say thanks so much for the invite, and I will, as time allows, very happily take any questions. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Brian. That was very enlightening. I haven't actually had the opportunity to see some of those more recent maps, as you know. The first question that has come up is, given all of this and what we've seen, is there actually the ability, in your opinion, to eradicate wild pigs in Canada?
That's an excellent question. Can we eradicate? For 8 years, I said, whenever asked that question, I say, absolutely. I think we can, with the right plans and efforts and coordination, we can eradicate wild pigs in Canada. But the window is closing. And I don't say that anymore. I don't think that's realistic where we're at now. I think we have several what I call strongholds of wild pigs that are in these really wild areas. I mean, we're talking about 1 million square kilometers. So I say that I think we've lost the ability to eradicate in some small areas, but I think the good news is that there are massive areas of Canada where there are some areas that are actually pig-free and could be maintained wild pig-free, and there are huge areas. And so Ontario is an excellent example where they've had some fairly recent number of sightings, but have moved rapidly, and they're doing all the right things, in my view, and could very quickly, with the right application of effort, become pig-free and really work at staying pig-free. BC is very similar and, in fact, in probably better shape right now. And so there are entire provinces that can do this. It's the prairie provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, where we have the overwhelming majority of pigs. And given the level of effort we've seen so far, and given the strongholds and the massive home ranges and the challenges, I say we're it's going to be a massive struggle for sure.
Okay, and then can you expand a little bit on the difference between whole founder eradication versus sport hunting? Because if sport hunting is allowed, we know that that causes wild pigs to scatter. So, opinions, I guess.
Yeah, well, certainly the one of the issues is these pigs are so smart and so elusive, and when animals escape from farm, keep in mind these things were born and raised on farm and used to feeding troughs and watering systems, and they're sort of ready to be fed and taken care of. And so, what I've heard many people say is that once they escape, you have one chance. And if you can either recapture them or more likely just shoot them and remove them, then you can do that. But once you've shot at them and they learn and they get smart and they run away, these pigs get so elusive, and we see them, being primarily nocturnal when they get pressure on them, and so we can't discharge firearms at night to hunt them, and we can't. So we have really limited options, and they get into the heaviest, ugliest willow cover riparian zones that you can't even walk through, and so they just become really, really difficult. So sport hunting not only breaks them up, but just makes any removal programs, any detection programs so much more difficult. These pigs are incredible. I mean, we've had helicopters hovering over a patch of shrub, the size of my kitchen, and we know they're in there, but they will not come out, and you have to have somebody hop out and actually physically go in and remove them. So, yeah, sport hunting is, for a whole bunch of reasons, just not the answer. And, in ideal circumstances, with perfect conditions, you might get 20% harvest of a population, but that's not anywhere near enough. We need into the 80s, 90s, and really ideally that 100% removal. You find a sounder of 12, you remove 12. And in U.S. programs, and certainly in our program, when we said, here's 12, if you kill 10, then you've considered that a 100% failure, and you've wasted your time and money. The only real success that I think anybody sees is find 10, remove 10, find 15, remove all 15, and anything less than that is a failure.
Okay, so then do you think that there's any benefit to fencing genetic nucleus barns if there's no eradication program either in the province or on a federal level? So you're protecting a few barns, and so that might be significant to the industry, but it might be somewhat pointless.
Well, yeah, I'm here to share the science, and some of those comments are above my pay grade, but I think that up until today, we haven't seen anywhere near enough. It's been absolutely 100% too little, too late in terms of control efforts. But at the same time, there are people really trying really hard and doing. And so Alberta has a program and they have a plan. They're ramping that up. Saskatchewan has been killing pigs for a long, long time. Just the reality. And again, unfortunately, some of my comments are often taken as a criticism and taken very personally, but this is just the science is just showing that as we map these things, they're expanding rapidly, just like a forest fire or cancer cells, or the counts just keep going up and up, and that's just the data telling us what's there. People are out there doing things and removing pigs, and Manitoba doesn't really have a program of removal at all or a plan that I'm aware of. So, yeah, at the level that we're at, and certainly in Saskatchewan, where we see really the overwhelming majority of pigs, probably 60+% of all pigs, or at least the watersheds are within Saskatchewan in Canada. We see them removing pigs and doing a lot of good stuff, but without a coordinated plan and a really integrated effort across multiple methods. We're not there yet. And so in terms of other values around domestic pig farms and that, and we just haven't seen a lot of engagement with industry on this. I think there's been a sort of a hope that this will go away on its own, or that some efforts will remove it. But at this stage where we're at, we need a massive, full-throated, coordinated effort to start to make ground. And even waiting one more year means that now, when we're riding that exponential curve, we talk again next year. How are we going to go anywhere but up towards the sky?
Right. So there are then a number of questions regarding the disease profiles and whether or not there's been any disease testing or surveillance so far on any of the wild pigs, and I can actually answer that as well. But go ahead, Ryan.
Well, it's an interesting question, and I will say that, to my knowledge, there hasn't been any testing for African swine fever, and there has been a general reluctance to test to do that, or to even establish that disease issue. I will say in 2017 we removed a lot of pigs and provided them for testing, but I have no idea what the results are from that. So I haven't seen any outcomes, and so there have been pigs collected for sampling, and so there was a paper that came out probably about 4 or 5 years ago that did a small sample of animals on the order of, I think, 40 animals, and didn't find anything particularly concerning, but those are pretty concentrated bunches. And so in terms of widespread testing, that hasn't been done yet. And of the animals that have been collected, I'm not aware of any results available to anybody at this point since that last paper came out. So all the animals we've submitted, I don't know any results so far, unfortunately. But certainly, I mean, what the industry has said is that there's a lot of concern, and there's been a real reluctance to test in the wild for fear of what might be found. And also, from my perspective, I think the idea of just going around and sampling a whole bunch of things is always, you have to be careful that, what is the plan and what is the response if you do find something. And so that also isn't there yet, to my knowledge, in terms of, what do you do if you happen to find bovine TB, which, again, very, very unlikely, but it's not like it doesn't exist. There hasn't existed on the landscape in the last decade. So lots of good questions around that, none of which I have good answers for, unfortunately. And Chaz, if you want to add your thoughts, I welcome your expertise on that as well.
Well, as you know, we are keeping all of those samples that you have submitted to us for potential testing. Unfortunately, one of the big things always with testing wildlife is that you need to have a plan in place. What happens if something does come up, and what do you actually test for? So what is going to be on the test panel? So at this point in time, all of those plans are still in progress, and until there's a plan in place, if there is that finding, everything is on ice. So the expectation is that at some point in time they will be tested, but we've discussed that multiple times.
Well, and there to be, if I can add, Jez, too, I think that there isn't a response in the sense that, so for example, last summer, a past student of mine actually called me from the core area, the highest density of wild pigs in Canada, in Saskatchewan, and said, I shoot a lot of pigs. We have 100 coming into our swath grazing right now, and we're every night I just go and shoot as many as I can. But we just shot one that looks really, really sick and looks absolutely like, I'm no expert, but this thing needs to be looked at. And unfortunately, there was just no mechanism to do that. I was actually in the field in Manitoba, and I couldn't deal with it, but there was no mechanism or no phone number or nobody I could call to say, hey, this is this pig needs to get into the lab for testing. And I often think about that animal that's now buried somewhere. But so, yeah, I think definitely there are opportunities to look, especially at any sick-looking animals. My last point will be that the animals that we have monitored and that we've looked at in detail, I mean, they do look quite healthy, but we don't see a lot of emaciated pigs. They're usually in very good condition, but again, that doesn't tell the whole story by any means, obviously.
Yeah, well, exactly. And it's kind of like the submission of ticks, right? So you get overwhelmed, the labs, with ticks, and then they stop taking them in. But at that point, maybe that's when there are ticks that actually are infected with something that we didn't know about before. So it's somewhat unfortunate, the situation at the moment. But last question. Thank you so much, everybody, for being patient with us. If you do have any other questions, feel free to fire them at me, and I'll put them all together, send them to Ryan, and he can answer them all, and I will put them all as a summary when we send out the invite for next week. So the last question is, do you anticipate that sport hunting, given the situation with how the pigs hunker down and start having more babies, will be banned in the future in Western Canada?
Well, I will say, to be fair, that as an egghead scientist, I can throw out all kinds of recommendations and pat myself on the back for these wonderful notions. But in practice, this is going to be a tough one. This is something that's near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. One of a lot of people refer to them as the poor man's grizzly, because these are an animal that will, if you hunt them, they may charge you and try and kill you or hurt you. And so people love to hunt them. There's no license. You can hunt 365 days a year. You could go out and shoot, theoretically, with enough effort and enough know-how, you could go out and shoot hundreds and hundreds of pigs yourself. And so people that languish waiting for deer season, this has been a boon for hunters, and they're really, really excited about them. Hunter success is painfully low, and I get hundreds of calls and emails and Facebook messages a year saying, where do I get them? And then I sort of tell them some suggestions and advice, and then they phone me and yell at me because they didn't get one. But I think that trying to remove sport hunting at this time will be very, very difficult. It's a massive political hot potato. But one of the other point that when we speak to eradication and success, people ask me, what's the number one thing we need for eradication? And to my view, the most important thing we need is leadership. And this is not just somebody in charge. I mean leadership in the true sense of people that are willing to make the tough calls. And this is something we haven't seen yet. This has been pretty softball stuff with wild pigs and kind of, some good efforts, but this is going to be one of the big tests of, probably the biggest test of leadership, is that if we're serious, and, there's a number of ways to tell if an area is serious about wild pigs or not. And one of the probably most obvious ones is, are you going to bite that bullet and deal with the sport hunting issue? That's going to be a tricky one. I appreciate it's difficult, but at the same time, if the notion of actually eradicating pigs is there, then you have to choose. Do you want eradication or do you want wild pigs? So I don't have a crystal ball in front of me, and again, those decisions are well above my pay grade. I make the recommendations and let those folks make the harder calls, but I just don't see any real progress forward on the Canadian prairies until that issue is tackled full front. So I guess we'll see. That's my soft pedal answer to that.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Ryan. This has been phenomenal, and we really appreciate you taking the time out to present to us, especially given the fact that you've got a full house as well as a full course load and the number of students that you're also helping at the moment. So thank you a lot for that. So next week, everyone, we have Kevin Kuczynski, who's going to be talking to us about recovering flu genomes from wild bird habitats for outbreak prevention and pandemic preparedness. So a very timely discussion. And we look forward to hearing from Kevin. So in the meantime, have a great week, and don't forget to stay safe and wash your hands.
Thanks a lot.